Following him is Caterina Principe, who is Portuguese, has been with the beginning of Bloco, with Bloco from the beginning. She has been living in Germany. I saw her last at a meeting in Greece this July. She has been one of the most incisive and insightful commentators, not only on the rise of the left in Portugal, but also much more broadly on the state of the new European left parties, Die Linke, Syriza, and so on. And obviously, given what's being negotiated or not, prevented from being negotiated in Portugal this weekend, in light of the outcome of the election, what she has to say will really be hot news, I think.
Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Cool. I would like to start to do a short, two short points on because when we're talking here, and maybe, okay, so Corbyn and the Labour Party is a particular example, but when we're talking about the new parties or the new European left, we're talking about a certain strategy of party building that is occupying a certain political space and has a certain strategy that has been developed in the last 15 years, more or less, in Europe, with different experiences in different countries, and that reflects the outcomes both of what is happening with Syriza, with Syriza's victory, what is happening in Portugal with the growth of the left right now, the experiences of the German left with the formation of a broad left party, and also what is happening in Spain. So I would like just to make two short points about what is the political space that these parties of a new type occupy, as we call them, and a second thing about what has been our general strategy for almost all of these parties. So I would say that the political space that these parties occupy, with the rise of neoliberalism and the shift of the traditional social democracy, of the European social democracy, from mass workers' parties into parties that administer austerity and cuts in Europe, it's the political center of gravity has shifted to the right. So it means that the struggles and the political programs for the political movements and programs for defending the social welfare state, labor rights, and so on, were left orphaned for decades in Europe. There was no one actually occupying and taking up these programs. So, with this right-wing drift, and together with the fall of the Soviet Union, the anti-war and the outer-globalization movements, there was an opening of a political space in Europe. So, these parties of a new type, were founded in one hand in the rejection of Stalinism, and on the other hand a new idea of how to relate with social movements, and with the aim, and this is an important thing to understand what happened in Greece but also what is happening in Portugal, of winning the social basis of the support of the liberalized traditional social democracy. So doing this meant to adopt as our political program the points of the traditional social democracy in Europe, so protecting the welfare state, labor rights, and so on, and adding a broader layer of other questions around oppression, environmental demands, and so on. So I think this is the type of space that these parties of a new type occupy in Europe. And the second thing that I wanted to say is about strategy. So what has been the strategy for these parties? And I would say that these parties have what I call a dual strategy. So on the one hand, these parties want to win a big layer of society that is discontent with politics as such, with the political system as such. So for example, in Portugal, just in the elections not even a month ago, there was 43% of the population did not vote. That's a high number. But at the same time, it is, as I said, to try to win over the support, the social basis of support of the liberalized social democracy. So by this, we need to take up the program of the traditional social democracy and at the same time point in a more radical, more anti-capitalist direction in order to try to win these two groups in society that are fairly different. And so this has also been a problem, a strategical problem for the left, because as I used to say, for the people who are the supporters of the traditional social democracy, we seem too much like parties outside of the system, and for the people who are outside and discontent and skeptical about the system, we seem like parties that are too much like the parties of the system. So this is an important dual strategy, but one that has also created openings and closures, but sometimes also closures for these parties. But I also want to say something else, that aiming for winning the social base of support of the former democratic parties or the social democracy has been complicated, and it has only happened when they entered a process of self-inflicted destruction, so to say, as what happened in Greece with the PASOK. But this also, I think, reaffirms the importance of having parties that have autonomous political programs, so that when the traditional social democracy goes on managing austerity and applying austerity, there is a political space and a political formation where people can leave to and engage with. So I think our strategy, although with openings and closures, has been and still is the correct one. So what happened in Portugal? Which is what I'm supposed to talk about. So we had elections on the 4th of October. And we were not expecting this for the last months, or for maybe a month before the elections, but the right-wing coalition won again. This is the right-wing coalition that has been applying austerity for the last 4 years in Portugal, that has been in power or in office since 2011 until now. So we did not anticipate this result. We were actually expecting that the Socialist Party, which is, let's say, well, so it's important to say, in Portugal, all parties have very left-wing names because they were all created during the revolutionary process. So the conservatives are called Social Democrats, because if during the revolution, if you would call yourself the Conservative Party, no one would vote for you, or after the revolution. So that's an important thing, because when I'm going to mention the Socialist Party, they are actually the liberal, the liberalized traditional social democracy. So we were waiting, we were expecting that the Socialist Party would win the elections. And by this, because they haven't been in power for the last years, and so they managed to win a sort of oppositional flair, criticizing the way in which the right wing was implementing austerity. We were expecting that they would kind of eat the political space of the left, that is actually the anti-austerity left. This didn't happen. So the right wing won again, although not with an absolute majority. So they won, but they are forming a minority government. And the Socialist Party came in second, and surprise, surprise, we were not expecting it. Bloco, the left bloc, the party that I'm a member of, so the party of the radical left, got its best result ever. 10%, we elected 19 MPs. We were not expecting this. And I think there's a reason why we were not expecting this, which is important to mention. This was a surprise for us because this electoral result is not a translation or a direct translation, neither of a stronger social and political implementation of the left, nor a reflection of a movement and a moment of social and political contestation on the streets. So for the last 2.5 years, there has been almost nothing happening in Portugal. So that's why this was a surprise for us. We didn't expect it. We expected to have 5%. So I think, given the results of the Communist Party had 8.5, this means that the anti-austerity Euro-critical forces are compose almost 20% of the Portuguese parliament right now. One thing that I think it's important, as for an analysis about the electoral results, is to think, why did the right wing win again? This is something no one was expecting, as I said before, at least not before, a month before the elections. So I think the first factor that we have to take in consideration was that the European Central Bank introduced a program a couple of months before the election called the Public Sector Purchase Program, which buys basically Portuguese public debt in order to lower the interest rates. And this was the reason why Portugal was able to pass in the last evaluation of the Troika, and therefore did not have the need to ask for a second bailout. And let's keep in mind that this help was never offered to Greece. Right. Never. So this was a political move from the part of the European elites and institutions in order to keep the right wing in power. This is very clear. Another thing that I think it's important is that because we did not need to ask for a second bailout, the narrative of the worthiness of our sacrifices made its way in Portuguese society. So the last 4 years have been really hard. Wages have dropped. Poverty has grown immensely. Precarity is the common experience of any sort of labor relation, but it was worth it because the Troika is away. The Troika is out now. We didn't have to ask for a second bailout. The interesting thing is that our debt is still growing. Of course, because we got this help, which was momentarily given by the European institutions, but it's not coming again all the time. So our debt at the moment is at 130% of the GDP. Once the crisis started, or once the program started, the memorandum with the Troika started, it was at 80%. So it has grown 50% in the last 5 years. And I think also the right wing did a very, very smart campaign. So on the one hand, basing their campaign on this narrative of the worthiness of our sacrifices, and on the other hand, making a very non-confrontational campaign where they basically refused to engage in almost any political debates with any parties and so on, in order to keep somehow protected. I think the other reason, which is very important, of why to explain the victory of the right, is the electoral failure of the Socialist Party, so of the liberalized traditional social democracy. Because although they have gained some oppositional flair in the last years, as I said, their electoral program and their economical program is very similar, is basically not very different from the one of the right wing. And so they tried to build an electoral campaign on building this oppositional flair and trying to propose answers to austerity, but at the same time they fell into contradictions with themselves all the time because their program says the contrary of what they were saying on the street. So their campaign was also full of propaganda mistakes, but also of very clear political contradictions. And the third thing that I think it's important, which is not why the right wing won, but I think it's important to understand what happened with Bloc and why we were not expecting, or what happened, why did we grow. I think first of all, there is what is starting to happen in Portugal, at least not yet at the same degree of what happened in Greece, is something that is common to see in moments of crisis, which is a polarization of society to the left and to the right. So the right wing wins again, but at the same time we have anti-austerity, anti-capitalist or capitalist critical forces having 20% of the parliament. So this is clearly, so the center is being eroded, it's disappearing. And so there's a process of political polarization in society. And I think what explains or helps to understand Bloco's very good result, even if what I said, it was a surprise for us because it doesn't reflect a clear political implementation, are maybe three things. One was a very good public campaign on the streets that managed to bring into the center of the political debate the central issues that are being discussed in Portugal: austerity, unemployment, precarity, migration, the privatization of gas, water, and a lot of social services. So this opened a political space where we could actually bring our positions and center also the question of migration, which is a very central question since almost 600,000 people have left the country in the last 3 years, which is the biggest migration wave. It's even bigger than the one that happened during the dictatorship in the 60s. So this is clearly, so the fact that we managed to do a very public, strong political campaign that conquered the political space to bring up our political proposals was very important. The second thing that I think, and then again, just to connect it with Greece and about the opens and closures, Syriza's victory in January and the victory in the referendum was clearly an opening for the Portuguese left. But we also have to be very serious about it, that the signing of the third memorandum was a closure for the anti-austerity left in Europe. And we were very afraid of it. And that's actually what a lot of the parties in Portugal were trying to throw at Bloco, saying, look, even Syriza had to agree with austerity. So what you're proposing is unthinkable, it's impossible. And we were very afraid that this, because at the moment when Syriza won, this was an opening for us, but then when they signed the third memorandum, it was a closure for us, that this would actually determine our results. And I think what we did very well, and I think this is also a shift, and in my opinion, a positive shift, we were capable of shifting this narrative by saying that what happened in Greece and what happened with Syriza, we want to place the responsibility for what happened in the European elites, and saying they were forced to sign this memorandum. The European elites did not respect democracy and sovereignty, but at the same time we needed, and this was very important, to strengthen our critique of the European Union and the Euro. So during this electoral campaign, there was a new political space that opens in Portugal for a more critical position towards the European Union and the Euro, where one of our lines for the elections was no more sacrifices for the Euro. And this is an interesting moment because it was the first time that Bloco actually said this in public and during the debates. And this is important because it contradicts the narrative that said that the left can never grow if it has a more Euro-critical perspective. So we developed a more Euro-critical perspective and still got the best results ever. So I think there's a political space that the Portuguese elections opened for a discussion about the limits and the problems of the European project. So what is happening right now? Okay, I'm sorry, I spoke a little bit too long and I have 4 minutes. What is happening right now? So there's a minority government on parliament, the right-wing government, the right-wing got won, but didn't get absolute majority. So what happens in Portugal is the president of the republic chooses who he invites to form government. Because we know this, okay, there's a particularity in the political momentum in Portugal. We will have presidential elections in January. And according to the Portuguese constitution, the president of the republic cannot dissolve a parliament within his last 6 months of mandate. So he cannot dissolve this parliament. At the same time, the parliament cannot dissolve itself within the first 6 months of its existence. So this parliament has to function somehow. No one can put it down right now. So there has to something has to be found. So when this happened, two things happened simultaneously. The right wing was trying to grasp the Socialist Party in order to support them, and both Bloco and the Communist Party told the Socialist Party, we will negotiate with you to allow a government led by the Socialist Party if you agree on a set of measures that we're putting forward, which have to do with stopping the liberalization and how do you say this? The flexibilization of the labor market, which have to do with unfreezing the pensions, of giving back the cut salaries of the last 4 years, and lowering the taxation for employers and also for employees, which is the only way to sustain the social security system. We were not this was a tactical move. We were not expecting the Socialist Party to say, okay, let's try and negotiate, but that's what they did. So they said, okay, let's try and negotiate. So for the last month, both Bloc and the Communist Party have been meeting with the leadership of the Socialist Party and discussing measure by measure what could be an agreement that on the one hand kicks out the right wing of office and at the same time prevents more austerity measures. The President of the Republic did not care about this. Although both the Socialist Party, Bloc and the CP said we will not vote in favor of a right-wing government, of the right-wing government on parliament, the President of the Republic still said they are the ones who are going to form government. This was very interesting also because his speech was extremely harsh, and he tried to create a kind of like a sanitary boundary around the more Euro-critical left by saying, I will never allow a government that is supported by left forces that are critical to the European Fiscal Compact, that are critical to NATO, that are critical to the Lisbon Treaty, and that are critical to the Euro. I will never allow this. And this means that, again, democracy and sovereignty is not as important as the dictates of the European institutions, and even the President of the Republic says this very clearly. So right now what is happening is the right wing just formed government. It's gonna go to the parliament next week and it's gonna be voted down. So it's not gonna pass. Unless, this is very improbable, still possible but improbable, unless there's 7 MPs from the Socialist Party who decide to break away from the Socialist Party and vote to approve a government of the right. So what are the possible scenarios? One, this happens, which I think is improbable, but we never know. I also made mistakes before. Second, we have a Socialist Party-led government with the support of the Left Bloc and the Communist Party based on very concrete agreements to end austerity, which is also hard because, and this is what is at stake for the left, we know that if we vote in favor of the state budget for 2016, that this state budget, without renegotiating and cutting the debt, is basically impossible. And so what can happen, or what is very possible to happen, is that in 3 or 4 months, the Socialist Party says, we need to correct our state budget because what we wanted to apply is not possible, and now the deficit is over something, the European institutions say we need to cut there, and so it's a very dangerous game that we're playing here, both the Left Bloc and the CP, because it can happen that we allow a government of the left that ends up applying austerity measures. And we will be the ones that are going, so people are going to say, you did this, you supported this government, and this can be a closure for the left. So this is a possibility. Another possibility is to have a caretaker government. That the President of the Republic, because he stated very clear that he will not allow a government of that is supported by Euro-critical forces, it doesn't matter that they constitute almost 60% of the parliament, that he will not allow it, that he just nominates a caretaker government that will last for some months, which would be a government of the right, and then we will have snap elections in 6-7 months again. So this is what is at stake. I think is for the left, we have to be very careful with this tactical game because it is a dangerous game that can end up not going very well if we're not very clear where our red lines are. Where do we break? If the Socialist Party says, okay, now we have to cut pensions or we have to cut wages, how do we formulate a narrative that allows us to cut with them and to say, okay, we won't support this government anymore, without then suffering a public criticism of like, okay, now you are responsible for political instability and so on and so forth. So it's a difficult moment. At the same time, the Socialist Party also has a lot at stake because they know that if they support the right, their political space will be over. But they also know that if they support the left, they will clearly have to change their program. So this is what, I'll leave it here for now, but this is what is at stake at the moment in Portugal.